Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. Secure Talk is brought to you by AdeQuest, your cybersecurity and compliance partner. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host of this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking with David Ducolon from AdeQuest, and we're going to be talking about MFA, multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and what are the differences between those two or how they work together, maybe even taking a little look at SSO, and some of the trends and best practices related to those three different items. But before we get started, David, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks.
Good. It's Friday to start a 3-day weekend, so I think pretty much everybody's doing great, and the sun is starting to come outside, right?
That's correct.
Good deal. Hey, before we dig into those interesting items, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and the work you do?
Yeah, so like you said, Mark, my name's Dave Ducolon, and I am a cybersecurity solution architect, and I help customers who want to create a security operations center, or if they need to have somebody on their team that helps them evaluate IT decisions purely from a security perspective. That's really where my experience is, and that's what I really love to do. And that's probably why you and I are going to talk about MFA versus conditional access.
Exactly, because one of the things that we're seeing a lot these days is companies are becoming more and more aware of multi-factor authentication, or MFA, which we will use from now on. But there are a lot of questions about when to use it and how to use it. But before we even dig into that, why don't you give just a quick overview of what is MFA, and why is it important in your opinion?
Yeah. No, that's perfect segue. MFA, multi-factor authentication. For those of you that are not aware of what it is, think of the first time that your online bank account made you give them your phone number so they could call you and either text you or voice and verify that it was you that was trying to log in when you're setting up your password. That's multi-factor. You've got one factor being your access to the website with the user ID and password, but you've got another factor being that you own a physical device, whether it be a landline telephone or a cell phone, but you've got this other device, which is another factor for authenticating. So then there are two. And MFA really comes down to there's three pieces, and we need two of those three pieces. One, something you are, which can be biometrics. You have fingerprints, you have retina signatures, there's even voice signatures. But then we also have something that you have, and that's going to be your cell phone, or that's going to be your laptop computer running Windows 10, hello. And the last piece is something you know. This is where comes into, it can be a password, but if it's too complex and you know it, you're going to start sharing it and it's going to get lost. So you go with like a 6-digit security code because it's something you know. And then people have to figure out which of the two of the three are you using. And that's why it's not double factor authentication or triple factor authentication. It is simply multi-factor authentication.
And I guess the underlying principle is right, it's you may lose your password or somebody may come across that, find it, steal it from you, whatever. But the likelihood of them being able to have both your password and your cell phone to capture a MFA text, for example, or to have obviously some biometric information that matches yours, the likelihood of that is really, really, really low, right?
Right. What we're doing in security every day is we're trying to increase the cost to the hacker of hacking you. And all we're doing here is we're raising the bar exponentially. Simply sniffing out or going and social profiling, fishing out your password, that's one level of effort, and it really is mostly just patience and some code. But once we get to this, now they have to really get invested in trying to steal your identity. And it's all about identity protection. That's what MFA is. There is information protection, but that's not MFA. MFA is protecting your identity, and that happens at work, that happens in personal, that happens every time that you are remotely saying who you are.
Yeah, so let's talk about some best practices related to using MFA. So let's just stick with a basic example where I'm trying to log in. I put in my username and my password, and then it will say we're going to text you a message or a code, and then you have to insert that code, right? So that's one type of MFA. Now, would you say that everybody in an organization every time should use MFA, or what are your ideas around best practices for that?
So MFA is best used to protect identities during the access and authentication for a purpose. So, and this starts to get to the crux of the overall podcast here today, is you probably started out with your bank doing this to you, and then you did it maybe with your cell phone account, and then you've got it with your insurance account, which went online, and you're getting MFA'd from all of these people every time you do something. So that brings up the question, do you really want somebody to challenge your authentication through an MFA means when you're, say, at home paying bills and you got to check your insurance and you got to check your cell phone usage and check all of this, and your phone keeps popping up that you got to open it and you got to get that code, you got to type that code in, then they say yes, and pretty soon what my experience is, people stop doing the best practice of checking. Because they simply go to the one place, pass it once, and here, have all my money. Okay, and let's hope it was all authorized.
So what you're saying is if you force an MFA on every single login for every single type of app or service that you are accessing, it becomes a real pain in the backside, right? It's an annoyance, and then that leads people to just sometimes turning it off, which then exposes them to the whole point of the MFA or the protective qualities of the MFA, right? So it's kind of like what you're saying is you should have some type of balance between, yes, we want to use this, but if we use it too much and we force it used every single time, people will shut it off. So we have to kind of find a happy medium. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, it's use it when it's appropriate, and MFA provides a secure token. Now, this is getting a little bit technical here, but there's something called the public and private key. And the public key resides at your bank or at the doctor's office or, anywhere where you're trying to, or even at work. The private key is what you have on your device. And once you've authenticated that through a secure means, an MFA, that token then, that key is available, and it should be able to be persisted and used longer because it authenticates and says who you are. So it's around the proper implementation and architecture of the distribution of these keys, because you don't need to throw them away. You can reuse them. And that's really what we get down to when we're talking about MFA to make it more user friendly is to get it less obtrusive. It's always going to be somewhat of a hassle. It's a hassle to unlock my house with the key. But when I'm home and I'm going in and out getting groceries, I don't lock the door every time I leave. Okay. And that's kind of what MFA is.
That's an excellent analogy. And so let's back up a little bit, and let's say you're advising a client. It's a mid-sized corporation, maybe a couple thousand employees. At a minimum, maybe their the rank and file employee says, "Oh, I don't want to be hassled with this MFA." What is the minimum? What is the absolute minimum that you would say? You know what? Okay, fine. You don't have to use MFA for everybody or every time, but these people in these situations absolutely need to use it.
So let's take businesses as our primary use case here. And as an employer implementing MFA, the first thing that I'm going to do is say that if you are on a domain joined device, so whether that's using a mobile device management application like Intune, or whether it's using Active Directory and Windows operating system, it's those devices I want to say to start with are going to be more secure, less easy to hack into, less easy to break your identity than if I'm at a coffee shop or if I'm on a home computer, or, you don't want to leave your credentials around. That's the worst case. So the first thing is simply put up a rule that says I'm going to authenticate anybody trying to access a secure information. So basically coming to my, let's say, OneDrive and SharePoint where I've got corporate confidential information. I want you to have to do a second factor authentication if you're not on a domain joined device.
Okay.
But
go ahead.
Don't do it every time you touch it. This is the real secret here. It's not so much limiting what the use case is, but saying now that device has been authorized through that protocol, I want that token now to go from SharePoint to Exchange, to Word, to Excel. I want all of those to recognize that token because it has been authenticated through the most secure cryptographic methods possible today, and we want to make that available and reduce the experience of it, the friction to the user, which gets them a lot more happy to do it when once every couple of days or every couple of weeks, you get asked for a second factor. Okay, I'll give you that.
Okay, so what you're saying is pick your battles. And if it's a domain joined device, you probably don't need that MFA. But if you're sitting in Starbucks on your personal phone or your tablet or whatever, it's probably reasonable for the company to say, verify who you are, let's do this MFA. But now that you've done that, we'll give you access to all the apps for a set amount of time. Maybe it's every 3 days you have to authenticate again, but it's not going to be every day or every time that you log in or every specific app that you access. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and it needs to be environment aware. So your phone, though, is something that could go from when I'm on the corporate network. I'm still not domain joined because I didn't use Intune, and I have to do a multi-factor authentication. But then if I go to a Starbucks and I get on that free Wi-Fi there, I will have to do another authentication. But when I'm in my car, I'm not going to have to do another authentication because then I'm just running over a private network, which is the mobile phone provider that I have. So there is a little bit that we have to educate the users because it's not going to be as consistent or as simple as what you said, that, hey, I do it once and it's going to just leave me alone for 3 days. Well, yeah, 90% of the time it's going to leave you alone for 3 days, but there are times when it's not.
Gotcha. Well, what about global admins? How would you treat them in the context of MFAs or conditional access?
So global admin is a whole other discussion. Let's go look at like the Equifax
Actually,
hack that they had.
was it?
And
Maybe it was. In addition to Equifax, I know the one that the MFA really played an important part was Deloitte.
Deloitte, MFA would have 100% stopped it at Deloitte. But what you had even at Equifax is that you had the administrator not following all of the regulations. The IT admins are really good at telling the whole user community, you need to follow the best practice, you need to have good cybersecurity health, and yada, yada, yada. But then when you look at themselves, they're kind of cutting corners everywhere. So given that, with the admins, you don't want anyone to be a global admin. That's a role, that's not a person. So when I'm on the system and I need to go in and I need to set up a whole new virtual network environment in our cloud provider and grant everybody access, and then I'm a global admin because I need to have multiple roles, multiple hats. And so why don't I do that? But another example is I'm going in and I'm going to create a new conditional access rule. Well, that's a security administrator. That's not a global administrator. And that is not any one person. There are multiple people that can have those roles. So let's create the roles, protect the roles with multiple MFA, and then require different individuals to think of it like a library. You're checking out the book. Well, let's check out the role and say, okay, I need to do this stuff. It's going to take me the next 2 or 3 hours. Okay, so I check it out now and I go to work as an administrator. But then when my time runs out or when I say I'm done, it goes away. And what that really does is if you lose your credentials, becoming that temporary thing and having it time out, that makes it so the hackers trying to move laterally or to do damage to your environment, they are severely constrained because they can't make that request from a third application to check out this role. So that is an MFA, but it's a complex MFA.
Right. So basically what you're saying is if you're in that role, then you should use or enforce MFAs in more situations. So use MFA as a protector of the role. But even if you're in that role, you probably don't need to be there 24/7. So elevate your permissions or elevate your role just in time or just when you need it for the duration of the time that you need it, and then get back out of there. Because if your password is compromised, somebody logs into your account, they won't be able to access those security admin or global admin rights. They won't have that access, that level of access, because they won't be able to elevate themselves because they'd be forced to do some type of MFA to achieve that elevation, right?
Correct.
Okay. So It's funny because sometimes I'm relatively new in this industry, and when I came in, I had the impression, maybe because I watched too much TV or HBO or Mr. Robot or whatever, that there was a bunch of super secret sleuthing, sci-fi James Bond stuff that allowed hackers to be successful. But what I found is the reality is a lot less sexy, and it really comes down to basics. And we've talked about this before, that most intrusions start with a phishing campaign or compromised credentials, emails, and passwords, etc. And the easiest way, the most fundamental way, one of the most fundamental, better get that word right, ways to protect against that is just using MFA in the appropriate manner for the appropriate rules. And if we come back to the case of Deloitte, their global admin had turned MFA off for his role. Okay, if that would have been on, they would not have made the headlines. It would have been business as usual, right? And it's a really simple, fundamental thing, and it's common sense. But like the saying goes, common sense ain't so common. We have calls all the time with prospective clients and clients, and that they haven't activated MFA for anybody. And you can make an argument for that one way or the other. But just a couple of days ago, I had a call with a company. They had 12 global admins, and none of them were using MFA. And to me, that's just a massive risk. If you have one person, okay, it's still a risk, but when you times it by 12, and all of them are not using MFA, it's like it's a accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, it's human nature. You need to make it so that it is low impact experience to turn on multi-factor, and unfortunately, too many of the administrators started out and had to be the guinea pigs when this was a new technology, and they turned it on every time they touched the domain controller. They had to MFA, and then when they went to the ADFS machine, they had to MFA, and they would sit there and MFA in and out of machines all day long. It doesn't take too long before anybody is going to just turn off that function because, of course, these are admins. They can. So they turn it off for themselves, but leave it for everyone else and figure they're never going to get hacked.
Yeah, famous last words there. So let me ask you this. You bring up an interesting point, is you want to create a strong impact on security. So you want to create or use a process or a system that is going to dramatically increase security. At the same time, you want to have a low impact on the end user's experience, right? And with MFA, you do have different options. You talked about some of them. Some of the more common ones that we see, again, are using an authenticator app, maybe using a text message, having a callback. What, in your opinion, are the easiest ones for the end user experience to make it easiest to use?
Well, my recommendation to customers that I work with is the first thing they need to set is a standard default that works across the organization, which mostly that's going to be text messaging. Now, there's going to be people that can't or won't use their text messaging, and they are an exception, and you downgrade them to voice messaging, which is just a phone call, and it's a robo call. So all you have to do is pick it up and say, hello. Yep, somebody answered that phone. Okay, good. And it goes back, or you could give them a code. It's many options there, but the text one is the one that works for most people. Now, the Authenticator app, you have to register that app. And that's usually something that, as a very first experience, turns off a lot of non-tech people. So what I recommend is to deploy it with text messaging. And then the first time that Sally sees Joe just clicking on this the fingerprint button on his iPhone to get in and multi-factor. She says, "Oh, how you do that?" "Oh, well, I use this app." "Oh, how do I do that?" Okay, then they're willing to sign up for it once they see the value and have experienced a little bit of pain. I've seen a couple of customers, one very recently, that went and deployed the Authenticator app to absolutely everybody on the first try because they thought that was going to be the best thing. And there was nearly unanimous revolt in the organization.
Yeah.
So we had to roll it back, and then it's always harder to go back to your users now and say, okay, now we even had to rebrand it, and this kind of is to the title of this podcast. We said, nope, we're not doing MFA, we're doing conditional access now.
Which brings up my next question. Is there a difference between the two? How are they related? And yeah.
Multi-factor authentication is one piece of a conditional access environment. Conditional access is not authentication, it's access. And if without getting into security details and boring everybody, in the security world, there's a big difference between access and authentication. So access is under this conditions, if you have this, then do that. Very, very simple logic.
Give me an example.
So conditional access is if you are on a web browser that is not patched, then accessing the HR application portal, the SaaS application portal, we are going to require you to use multi-factor authentication. Or if you are on a compromised PC, so we know that it's been infected with some virus. Now when you want to access that SaaS application in the browser, we deny it. It's not an MFA, it's a deny. That's conditional access, is just checking the conditions and determining what's the bar for access, which gets passed down to the authentication side. And that's when there's the multi-factor authentication, maybe because I'm at a coffee shop and trying to access the corporate finances, where if I'm in the office, on the network, on a domain-joined machine, you don't need to prompt me for multi-factor authentication when I'm trying to just do my job.
So basically, it looks at the conditions of your login. And for example, and you tell me if this is correct or not, but I log in now and I log off. 5 minutes later, I log in from the other side of the planet, and they say, you know what, that's probably pretty difficult to do. So under that condition, under that impossible travel scenario, we're going to force an MFA, or we're going to lock you out of your account. And if they lock you out of your account, that's not an MFA at all. You're just locked. But the reason that I was locked is because of the condition of this impossible travel. Does that make sense? Is that
exactly?
Okay.
That's conditional access. And with your scenario, I'll tell you that Facebook and LinkedIn are two that are going to lock you out of your account anytime there's impossible travel. So if you're sitting on your couch in Seattle, Washington, and somebody accesses your Facebook or LinkedIn account from Corpus Christi, Texas, within 5 minutes, they are going to lock you out, and then they will try to contact you and go through a multi-factor authentication to verify who you are and require you to reset your password and move forward. So that is conditional access with a response of a block, but then also a later use of a multi-factor authentication to verify that they're actually talking to the right person, so that they can rectify the situation. Otherwise, they're going to leave you locked out because both of them have been way too vulnerable to hacks in the past, and they don't want to get in the news any more than anybody else. So they're going to take the approach of locking you first with that condition and then multi-factor to authenticate to verify who you are. Because do you really know Facebook? No. Does Facebook know you? Not really.
Right. Those are very good examples there. I'm thinking that, we talk about all these different scenarios of when to use MFA, and then when you get into conditional access, it seems like the potential number of scenarios just increases exponentially. How does a company or an organization kind of go through and make all these decisions? If this is the situation, we're going to do that, and how do they even? Is there a template of specific situations that they have to follow, or can they create their own custom situations for conditions? How does that all work? What's that process like?
So the security vendors do not give you a standard templates to deploy a conditional access. Now, that said, every vendor does have on their website, here are some sample scenarios, and you should use that. And to get started, you will evolve it over time and make it more complex, more appropriate for your environment. But what I tell people is that we're really talking about getting MFA into your corporate culture. You want people to not be confused by this, afraid of it, or have any negative feelings towards multi-factor authentication, because it is a necessary piece of my conditional access scheme. So don't deploy MFA by user and then attach it to applications. That's unfortunately what the low-hanging fruit is, and a lot of people will jump to that. So you go into Office 365, turn it on for myself, and set that anytime I access an Office application, I'm going to get multi-factor authenticated. Wow, sounds great. I'm going to be all secure. But what happens is every time I open Outlook and open Excel and PowerPoint and go to OneDrive and SharePoint and Skype, okay, you get the message. It's going to be painful and you don't want to do it. Rolling it out with conditional access means that what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the conditions. I'm not saying that you, Mark, you have to do multi-factor authentication. I'm going to say that any employee of a certain group, because we can do that. So we'll say all salespeople who are accessing corporate trade secrets from more than 50 miles from either their home or their office will have to have multi-factor authentication. Where your HR people, they have to get it when they're accessing it from their home PC. What you do is you get enough scenarios out there, and people over time will get registered and get used to this experience of a multi-factor authentication. Then it becomes a tool for you in your conditional access, as opposed to trying to be the solution. It's not a solution. It is only a tool in the solution of giving people authenticated access.
Excellent. So how does a company come up with all these different scenarios? Is this like I would assume that typically it's not just one individual, right? Is it you usually have a committee that will work on this, or is it some of the the security team? What do you see?
So what I see is IT departments think it's up to them, and they'll get it all together. And unfortunately, I mean, I've been in IT. I know that uh, they will think that they're doing everything in the customer's best interest. But in security, we look at things a little differently, that it's really a business decision. So what I have the luxury of is sitting down with IT, and they give me all their ideas of what they think are going to be the next newest and greatest set of policies. And then I write those up into English and run them by the business leaders, because the business leaders are the ones that really own the access controls to the data. And that's really what we're trying to control access to. We're not controlling access to a network. Whether you can put information on the wires in my network, that is really not all that important. What's important is getting access to the information. That's why people hack and break into your system. So let's go back to the business users and tell them, here's what it's going to cost in usability. Here's what it's going to cost in money. Here's what it's going to cost in time. And here's what you're going to protect. Is that worth it? And let it become a business decision what policies you're going to roll out, and then do it in a phased approach. Big Bang only worked for the universe. It doesn't work for anything in our normal daily lives. I don't care if it's Big Bang approach to changing your HR policies at work, or coming up with a Big Bang approach to changing the travel infrastructure in your city.
Right.
These are not Big Bang. These are all evolutions.
So take a phased approach, get feedback, implement a little bit more, get more feedback, and then work with that. Because you might have this great theoretical implementation plan, and then you take it over to the sales team, and they like, are you crazy? We can't MFA or every single scenario that you've outlined there, or you're blocking access because of from our home. Well, we work 60% of the time from home, so this is just ridiculous, right? So you gotta check in with the business owners before you implement, and like you said, roll it out in a phased approach. You did mention, and we're kind of running out of time here, but I do have one last question. You mentioned costs for a second. You have to check the costs. Well, if a company's already using Office 365 and they want to implement some type of MFA program, are there extra costs?
MFA doesn't really have an extra cost unless you have an international service that you need to sign up for or something like that. Or if you want to use a hardware token, that would be an extra cost. But that's really rare, and the people that need it just pretty much understand it. When I'm talking about cost, it's really the conditional access. Because MFA, as I really like to point out, is not the solution. It's a tool in the solution. So when you're going for conditional access, to be able to check conditions, I say that a good use case to start with is just to check and see if a device is domain joined. Yeah, that works because you've already got your Windows operating system, and it's got a domain join from your network connections. That doesn't cost anything extra. But when I start to do application-based security, or I want to do device condition-based security, I want to do risk analysis. These are all services that you would need to sign up for. It's much more cost effective to subscribe to these services than it is to rebuild them yourself from scratch. So there are costs in acquiring the ability to surface the conditions for your conditional access. That's where the cost may come into play.
Okay, so there could be some cost. MFA, if you run an Office 365, you can just turn it on. Again, you need to decide the conditions when it can be turned on, and if you want to be able to expand to all the types of different conditions we spoke about before, you may have to invest some additional money. Trying to think, last question there. You actually, as you're talking, I had a bunch of more questions pop into my mind, but let me just get your parting thoughts on this. Best practices for passwords, and do you think we're going to ever get to passwordless?
Okay, good questions. My personal feelings are that, let's take it in reverse order. Yeah, we are going to get to a passwordless environment. Biometrics will really come into becoming it'll become the way people access systems, and that will be passwordless. But that's not in the next year, 2 years, probably not even the next 5 years for it to be pervasive. So we're going to have to live with passwords. And I have always been a believer that a passphrase, not a password, is the best password. And it is not something that if you want to just use alphanumeric characters, then make sure it doesn't make any sense. The blue leaf swims quickly. Okay, you can remember that, or, part of a poem or something like that. Something that is not a normal set of phrases.
That's not a very good poem, by the way, but I'm going with you.
No, I'm just saying it needs to be illogical.
Right.
And if you can't be illogical yourself, then be creative and pull something out of a poem.
Right.
That's kind of where I was going with it. But ideally, you would throw in some special characters and misspell a few things and have your own special phrase, and you won't need to write that down.
So the idea is something that's easy for you to remember, but is very illogical, and it's not something that people are going to guess at. I mean, we've seen the statistics or the reports that say, the most common password is something like 12345, right? And things like my password or spring 2018, because people think, oh, I'm being kind of clever here, and but that's not clever at all, right? So, but come up with something that is unique to you, easy for you to remember, so you don't forget it. So you don't have to write it down, right? Because if you write it down, that's an opportunity to lose it. So, yeah, makes sense to me.
Well, and if you have to change it a lot, what people will come up with is, some amazing password, and then that they've gotten used to it. Now they have to change it 60, 70, 90 days later. They're going to put a 1 after it, and then a 2. Right. And then a 3. And because the password is something that was given to them, and we did have times in the past when passwords were passed over open text, your passwords can get hacked. And if you use a scheme of always just adding a number to it, that's something that a computer can do in a fraction of a millisecond. So you're really not being all that tricky. Much better to have something that is going to be about 15 to 20 characters long. It's going to be illogical if spoken, and if read, it's not going to be able to be read by a machine.
Totally makes sense. Well, hey, David, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today about MFA, conditional access, We touched a little bit on SSO, even though we didn't really call it that. And then, basic password hygiene. It's very interesting, helpful, and look forward to talking to you next time.
Hey, thank you very much.
Have a great 3-day weekend and see you next week, all right?
You too. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.